All right, good morning. Thank you for joining the Transit is the Answer Coalition meeting. I'm Melissa Meyer, Communications Manager at the RTA. We are going to give everyone just a few more minutes to join and introduce themselves before we get started here. Feel free to rename yourself if you need to in the Zoom, introduce yourself in the chat, share your organization, your pronouns, any recent great transit experiences that you want to share. We will get started in just a minute or two here. Just so everyone knows, we are recording this meeting. We will not be recording the conversations in the breakout rooms that we have later, but we'll just record what goes on here in the main session and post that for anyone who misses the meeting or wants to catch up later.
So is there just a speaker, is a speaker coming, or do we just contribute ideas, or what's the
Sure, yes,
protocol?
we have an agenda. We're going to get started in just a minute. We'll have a presentation from RTA, and then we'll be able to go into breakouts and have some more discussion in there. Just going to give everyone just one more minute to join, and then we will get started on our end. It would be good if everyone could remain muted for this early part of the meeting, and then we will go into breakout rooms where you'll have a lot of time to discuss ideas and respond to questions and give your feedback at that point. Okay. All right, so is everybody able to mute themselves, introduce themselves in the chat? I think we'll be able to go ahead and get started now. I'm going to first let our Executive Director, Leanne Redden, introduce herself, and then we will get underway. Leanne.
Thanks, Melissa. As Melissa said, I'm Leanne Redden. I'm the Executive Director of the RTA. And thanks everybody for coming and joining us. We're grateful to see so many of you who have continued to work and talk with us, who are passionate about all the transit in our region. And we really appreciate you giving up your time to give us that feedback and that input. And if this is your first coalition time joining us, welcome. And we hope you find this valuable and are able to provide us with some of your great insights. I think many of you know that we believe that new funding for transit must come with any reforms that are proposed. And really two potential paths forward toward reform for transit have been proposed. One of them calls for the consolidation of all four agencies and basically into one mega agency. And the other one, on the other alternative, calls for a strengthened regional oversight agency. So the reforms that we are here to discuss today are part of that larger conversation that many of you have been part of really since the development of our strategic plan. And much of that work centers around developing a stronger RTA. So importantly, these reforms connect very directly to improvements for riders. And I think we all agree that those kinds of rider-focused improvements are absolutely vital for the transit system. So we're on a path right now to develop these reforms into even potential legislation that could include a funding solution, or I shouldn't say could, that should and will include a funding solution to the fiscal cliff challenges that we're facing. Though that timeline overall, because it's sort of in conjunction with the state legislature, is still undetermined. We know at this point we don't have all the answers to all of the questions that you and others are sort of posing our way. But one thing I can say is that we're all committed to really a transparent process, and that really does include your input. And I think, you know, the real fundamental core and the purpose of this meeting is to both inform you as to sort of where we are in those conversations in that process. And also, though, as importantly, get that input from you. So thanks again for being here today. The team is going to run through a presentation, and then, as I think Melissa said at the top, break into breakout sessions so everyone can really dive in and give some feedback. I will turn it back to Melissa. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Leanne. As I said, I'm Melissa Meyer. I'm the communications manager at the RTA. I use she, her pronouns. And thank you so much for joining us. We are thrilled to have such a big group of people join. This is the 5th Transit is the Answer Coalition meeting. And if you haven't been to one of these before, they're a really great way to learn about what's going on with the transit system and give your feedback. So we're happy to have you. Jessica Cabe is the RTA staff member who is working the chat. So if you have questions or confused or see posts coming from her, that is who you can direct those questions to in the chat. We've got a big group here today, and we're glad there are so many passionate transit supporters. So to make sure we make the best use of our time and hear from everyone, as I said, let's try to stay on mute for this early part of the meeting and then save our conversation for the breakout rooms. We're planning for an hour-long meeting, but we do keep this meeting open for an extra half hour from 10:30 to 11. If you have any additional question and answer, or if you want to stay and ask more questions, talk more about this, RTA staff will stay on the call for that additional 30 minutes. So you will hear from a couple of RTA staff members today, including Kendra Johnson and Peter Kirsten. And they will introduce themselves when they get started. But for now, if everyone is ready to get going, we're going to go to the next slide. Feel free to press the closed caption button as well if you need a written transcript. I don't want to forget that part. So this is just kind of a little bit more of a welcome for those of you who may have been engaged with the RTA in this effort for a few years. And for some of you, this may be your first time joining us. Either way, we are very glad to have you here. If you are not familiar, the RTA is the Regional Transportation Authority. We do not operate buses or trains, but we oversee financing and planning for CTA, Metra, and PACE. We are required to create a strategic plan for our transit system every 5 years. And we took an especially collaborative approach during plan development of Transit is the Answer, our plan that was developed and approved in February of 2023. And we have continued that collaboration after the plan through this coalition, which meets every quarter. So we know that during the pandemic, transit was challenged like never before, and that we're still facing difficult times ahead. There's an operating funding gap looming when COVID relief dollars run out. Operator shortages have led to frequency and reliability issues, and there are concerns about safety and equity and climate that are all things that we think about regularly and have plans to address. But this is also a great time of opportunity. We believe transit is the answer to some of the biggest issues facing the Chicago region, but to achieve its full potential will take work and investment. And what we at the RTA have learned over the last few years is that we're not alone and we cannot solve these issues alone. So many people are passionate about not just preserving the Chicago transit system, but making it better. And so we have a chance to be successful at that when we all work together. And now we're going to kind of use this meeting to dive into the messy work of getting that done. Next slide. So the goal of today's meeting is to give you an update on kind of the state of the system and some recent legislative developments, as well as discuss and get your feedback on potential reforms to improve service and accountability for riders. We'll have, as I said, a presentation and some breakout groups, and then we'll come back together as a big group and have more time for networking, questions, and the next steps for the coalition. I'm going to turn it over to Kendra Johnson to provide a few system and legislative updates.
Thanks, Melissa. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kendra Johnson. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm on the government affairs team here. I'll start off with a few updates on the state of the system. So the first half of this year has brought significant ridership gains as CTA, Metra, and PACE are providing more than 1.2 million trips per weekday and adjusting their service to new travel patterns. PACE hit a new milestone, reaching 78% of average pre-pandemic weekday ridership in April, and expects additional increases as service is enhanced this summer. CTA ridership is up 13% year to date, averaging more than 1 million rides per weekday, with similar projections for continued ridership increases over the summer. CTA has increased service on both the bus and rail side. System-wide, more than 90% of people who rode transit pre-pandemic are riding today. Many of them are just riding less frequently because they're no longer required to be in office 5 days per week. And as ridership increases, crime decreases. In April, the system registered a 16% year-over-year decrease in crime. Weekend and off-peak trips have surpassed pre-pandemic numbers, and midday and off-peak trips continue to increase, including on Metra, where they've added hourly service on the BNSF weekend schedule, offering just as much service on Sundays as Saturdays for the first time ever. There are new fare passes and products to incentivize more regional mobility, and we've expanded the region's reduced fare offerings with an income-based fare pilot on Metra. Our budget projects continued ridership growth throughout the year. Next slide. And making paying for transit more seamless and affordable is a goal of Transit is the Answer that was highlighted during the plan development process. The service boards and RTA have made significant improvements in recent years. These efforts have been coordinated and intentional, producing a system that is more affordable and integrated than it has ever been. We can go to the next slide. The latest coordinated fare offering is the RTA Regional Day Pass pilot, which will be launched in the Venture app later this year. Regional Day Pass is a single fare for unlimited rides on all 3 service boards for 1 calendar day. Riders will be able to purchase this single pass on the Venture app, and the cost will be lower than paying for 2 or more separate fares. So on screen here, you can see the pricing for full and reduced fare by zones. The weekends offer a flat rate of $10, which is a great value for people coming into the city for all sorts of event and entertainment, or for city residents visiting family or friends in the suburbs. And as we just highlighted, the weekend metro market has long been one of the strongest ridership segments since the pandemic. Funding for the Regional Day Pass pilot will come from the RTA and will cover any lost operational revenue borne by the service boards. And the Regional Day Pass pilot will launch later in 2024. The recent ridership growth is encouraging, but it does not resolve our financial crisis. As a result of chronic underfunding and the growth of remote and hybrid work post-pandemic, starting in 2026, the system faces a projected budget gap equivalent to 20% of the region's operating budget, which is estimated at more than $730 million annually and growing. Increased funding is required to fill the gap and maintain service levels, while additional funds beyond the fiscal cliff can realize expanded and improved transit service. It's important to understand that the fiscal cliff is not a one-time event, and if the system does not receive adequate funding in the near term, hitting the fiscal cliff will trigger a negative feedback cycle of service cuts, losses of riders, and fare increases that, once initiated, will be nearly impossible to overcome. It'll get worse and harder to solve each year. But right now, with federal funding, federal relief funding filling the operations gap, the system is expanding service and seeing increased ridership, and in turn, riders are experiencing all the benefits of these improvements. Seizing upon this momentum will result in a system that works better for everyone. Delaying action risks setting the system back, making our region less equitable, economically competitive, and in a worse position to combat climate change. The RTA is working with state lawmakers, advocates, and the service boards to develop sustainable funding solutions that improve the system for all riders and maximize transit's impact on the region's economy, climate, and equity. The next slide. So in light of this, to highlight the value of transit and gather input on funding and reform ideas, Senate Transportation Committee Chair Senator Ram Villavalam scheduled a series of 6 subject matter hearings to be held over the summer to continue the conversation about the future of public transit in the Chicago region. The hearings come after legislation was introduced that proposes the consolidation of CTA, Metra, PACE, and the RTA into a new transit authority, the Metropolitan Mobility Authority, or MMA. The RTA does not support full consolidation because we don't believe it's the most effective way to improve service and accountability for riders. We're also concerned that the MMA proposal does not advance the critical funding need that is paramount to conversations about the future of transit. It's important to recall that the Plan of Action for Regional Transit, or PART report, developed by CMAP, outlines 2 possible options for transit governance. One envisions consolidating the RTA and the service boards into one regional entity, and the other envisions a stronger RTA with more influence and oversight on service, fare policy, and capital project prioritization. These are areas where the RTA's regional perspective and budgetary role could add value for riders and taxpayers. So the rest of the discussion today will focus on what implementation of the stronger RTA option could look like. And now I will hand it over to Peter to go through a few reform concepts with more opportunities for discussion during the breakout groups.
Thanks, Kendra. And thank you all for being here today. I'm Peter Kirsten. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a program manager working on implementation of Transit as the Answer. So I'm going to walk through proposed reform concepts. And the purpose here, again, is really to get your feedback and input on these proposals. Hopefully you've reviewed some of the information that was sent in advance of the meeting. In a moment, I'll walk through kind of each concept, and then we'll break out into smaller groups to talk through the details. Our hope is that these specific examples can show how a seamless rider experience can be provided and enhanced by a strengthened RTA. Also, it's important to highlight that these proposals can only have the intended impacts, again, if the system is adequately funded. So for each concept, we'll kind of first look at the current structure, some of the challenges, state the outcome that we're trying to achieve with the proposed structure, and then talk about how a change can benefit riders, how those benefits impact the communities we serve, or more broad concepts like climate change or the economy. So the first concept is regional service standards. Currently, each service board sets policy standards specific to modes and the part of the region that they serve. Riders, for the most part, travel on kind of 3 separate systems, and the schedules don't always align when you need to transfer between 2 or more. So a potential reform, RTA will work with stakeholders to define regional service standards for minimum levels of service for each mode of travel to ensure a basic level of access to transit for residents of the region. This could also include additional accountability, requiring the operating agencies to testify quarterly to the RTA board on how they are meeting these standards, and answer questions, from the regional board. So to be clear here, the RTA would not be doing service planning. The service boards would retain control over routes and schedules. That is where their expertise lies. Rather, we would use a regional lens to evaluate the impact of various transit services and identify areas where improvements may be needed. Mobility needs are changing. Hybrid work, we talked about that at the beginning of the meeting. Different patterns of development mean we need to adapt the service that we operate for the region. This is a stated goal of Transit as the Answer. And while the service boards are having some success adapting, Metra's push to a more regional rail style service is a great example. We do see value in inserting a regional rider perspective that could help alleviate some of the challenges that riders face. Lastly, a regional service standard and regional accountability positions the agencies to best serve all riders kind of beyond jurisdictional boundaries to make sure we're balancing suburban needs with the urban core, and that we're delivering a reliable system that people can really count on. So then the second concept, and again, we're going to take these one by one in the breakouts, so we'll have opportunities to kind of work through them. Second concept is regional fare policy, and it, same structure. So we'll talk about current challenges, proposal, and how that benefits the region. So currently, each service board sets fare levels and policy individually, which are primarily driven before 2020 by annual budget cycles. In recent years, there have been huge successes at increasing affordability and integration, and this is entirely due to the flexible federal funding that has been in place as part of the COVID relief. So this includes price and pass modifications to reflect how people are using the system differently, expansion of reduced fare programs to ensure the system is affordable for those who most rely on it, and integrating passes to make it easier to travel across modes and operators. So RTA recently published a report on how to make our fare system more equitable. One kind of nugget from that, there are 14 different fare programs reduced fare programs at the 4 agencies. All 3 service boards have student fares, but the rates and parameters vary greatly between the 3. A regional fare policy can ensure that we offer simple, easy to understand fares and fare programs, while also ensuring that we continue to be good stewards of limited public resources. The RTA is well positioned to lead the development of this policy, given our role overseeing the regional operating budget and ability to evaluate how various transit fare structures are working for riders across the region. A regional fare policy can keep us on track in making paying transit more seamless for everyone while improving affordability for those who most need it. Again, this is a stated goal of Transit is the Answer. And then the last reform concept is capital project prioritization. So again, same format here. Currently, projects and programs are determined by the service boards. RTA plays an oversight role through the budget process and the capital program. RTA evaluates progress towards regional goals. Recently collaborated with the service boards on a capital grant application for vehicle electrification. But for the most part, these decisions are made individually at each service board. Regional perspective is often inserted or evaluated too late in the process. So Transit is the Answer envisions a region that's winning the fight against climate change through advancing zero emissions transit, but also through ensuring that we deliver a connected region. Increasingly competitive federal funding opportunities want to see, a regional vision and coordination in projects. Transit is the Answer also set a goal for advancing transit-friendly streets and bus rapid transit. We need a strong regional voice to ensure that we're partnering with cities, counties, the state, and roadway agencies to prioritize moving people, not just cars, in roadway projects. A stronger regional agency kind of setting the vision and taking the lead on key federal and state grant applications will ensure that, again, we're maximizing the benefits that we can bring to the region, be that through climate action and reduction of greenhouse gases, investment dollars coming into the region, or just, again, being good stewards of our existing infrastructure. So again, there's a lot to discuss here. In a moment, we're going to have an opportunity to go into breakout sessions about these reform concepts that you just heard about. Each group is going to cover all three. So you'll have kind of 7 to 8 minutes to kind of work through. You'll have a facilitator and a note taker that will have some questions and prompts, but you're also welcome to pose questions and provide feedback. So we're going to open up the breakout sessions in a moment. You will be automatically assigned and placed into a group. We'll be in those sessions for about 30 minutes, and then we'll come back to the main room. Our plan is not to do a report out. Instead, we're going to take notes and compile what we hear and then do a recap blog. But again, we will hold the main room starting at 10 a.m. or excuse me, 10:30 for an additional 30 minutes that if people have questions or comments that they weren't able to pose in a breakout or were outside of the context of the discussion, bring those to the end of the session and we'll try to address those then. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Melissa and we will begin opening up the breakouts.
Great. I'm going to open these rooms in just a second. I just want one thing I want to add is Tina Smith from RTA is going to stay in this main room. So if you get kicked out or drop the meeting and need to be put back into your session, then she can help you with that. I see we have one hand raised. Kiana, did you have a question about the process?
Hello.
Hi. Did you have a question about the breakout
Can you
rooms?
hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello, how y'all doing today?
Good, good. Do you have a question about the process or are we ready to jump into breakout rooms?
Yeah, for the RTA.
Yep, I'm going to go ahead and open these rooms. If you have a question, you can go ahead and ask your facilitator in there so we can keep these conversations going.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Mr. Rich.
Okay, I think everyone has been assigned. If they're not at their computer, they might not have joined their room. I'm going to pause the recording just so any conversation in this main room.
And then do a blog recap in the coming days. So keep an eye out for that. We will send a link to it to participants. It'll be featured in on the blog and in the newsletter as well. But thank you so much for being here and sharing your input, your expertise with us. And again, if there are questions, you can raise a hand or feel free to use the chat. Yeah, we'll go from there.
I have a question for RTA staff. This relates to the service level questions that came up in our and earlier on the level of standard of service. I looked at the 4 or 5 page document that CTA put up. It's very detailed, but I'd really like to hear about how the RTA thinks they're going to implement oversight on these standards.
Sure, maybe I can take that. I think one of the proposals we have is sort of expanding, if we have the authority of how the service standards are put together. For example, we can include more measures like equity or access to also determine why a route should operate at a certain frequency than just focusing on ridership, which I believe service boards agree with us on that. But then sort of have, as we propose, maybe quarterly hearings with our board where the service boards are invited to present on what the actual service looked like compared to service standards and what can be done to fix any issues that come up. Currently, the key requirement is an annual budget cycle. So that really sort of puts a lot of issues into one bucket once a year for RTA board to sort of weigh in. And we believe there could be a lot more checkpoints during the year that can allow RTA to have some oversight on this area.
And why do you need legislative change to have the service boards not come forth and present their information to you presently?
So currently, the language that's written in the RTA Act very clearly legally requires an annual presentation on the budget that our board votes on. We can obviously coordinate, and we are working on this to have more regular presentations from CTA Metro or PACE that happen more than once a year. But whatever is put into the RTA Act is what is required. Everything beyond that is based on collaboration.
And my question is, have you reached out to be collaborative with the 3 service boards on this subject, and how have they responded?
I think the performance measures requirements, if you have heard about that a couple of years ago, it was added to the RTA Act that more performance measures should be evaluated, and the RTA board once a year would have to certify them. We have been having the conversations with the staff every month. So there's a lot of collaboration beyond just sort of meeting the requirement, but that requires a lot of conversations that are not happening sort of in the public realm in a board meeting sense. But I think we can make that we can solidify that as a requirement, which would make it a lot easier to have that happen on a very regular cadence.
And
follow-up question. If your preferred solution is more authority with the RTA, how are you going to do that other than obviously increasing staff? What are you thinking of putting in place so that the RTA would become a true oversight board? And how does that fit in with changes in the requirement of where the funding comes from, meaning the 50% from the fare box requirement?
Before you answer, Malik, I just want to ask people to raise their hands before they ask a question so that we can select people, just so we have us. It's at the bottom of your screen. Thanks so much. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
No, thanks, Tina. I think you make a great point that a lot of this cannot really happen because the recovery ratio requirement really puts pressure on all the agencies, which the two levers that the operators have is either to align services to the budget or increase fares. There's not much more we can do when 80+% of the budget is spent on service. So that is a huge important aspect, that both the increased funding for the cliff and either removal or lowering of the recovery ratio paves the way for some of these other reforms and oversight to happen. So that's a really good point. Thank you.
So we have someone who's raised their hand in the chat. Sherry, if you want to unmute and ask your question or make a comment.
You've done so much. This may already be in progress, but I'm wondering, a couple of things when I rode for so long was the suspension on the buses is terrible. So if you get older or if you have your own car, it's much preferable. The gaps in service we all know about in the suburbs, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm not even focusing on that. I would be wondering if they could do anything with the exhaust on the systems. There's things that you could buy that aren't that expensive, instead of just going straight to electric, that would actually make it more comfortable to sit in the bus area.
Thank you, Sherry. I'll just quickly add that you make a great point that there are technologies between a polluting old school diesel bus and a fully electric bus. Actually, some of the newest buses that our agencies are getting are either hybrid or sort of clean diesel and have some of the technologies that help lower the immediate impact of the emissions and improve experience. So that is something that the newest buses that are being delivered have, but it really depends on the manufacturing and technology progress, which in the US has frankly been tied to one or two manufacturers. So there isn't a lot of competition in that area, but it's a great point. Thank you.
Hi, Kate, I see your hand up. Go ahead and unmute.
Hi. So I'm really glad to hear that the service standards are not going to be just ridership based in your current conceptualization, given the complexities of that. But one thing I just kept on thinking in the conversations we were having about ideal service standards is that I think the service boards and RTA share, and probably everyone on this call, share a desire to see more service. So it's good to have transparency and a due process, but all this really hinges on not just maintaining funding, but increasing funding. And the fare box recovery ratio is obviously a barrier, but I think there's a lot of shared realization that's going to have to change. So I was just wondering what conversations you can share at this point in terms of thinking about new revenue sources. Of course, the gold standard is federal operating funds, but that's not something we on this call can magically secure. So I'm just curious where we are with conversations about funding and ideas and strategies there.
Thank you, Kate. Rob, feel free to jump in if you have anything from the legislative side, but we are looking at updating some of the numbers that you saw in Transit is the Answer of several menu of options. What does that look like a few years down that since RTA last looked at that list? We are hearing conversations around sort of, reform of the sales tax, but the question still remains whether lawmakers would be interested in doing something in existing sources and playing in the existing buckets, or looking at sort of a reform of additional sources or changing the way the structure is set up. So we are definitely very interested in those conversations involved, and we'll keep folks in the loop. But I do think the sales tax reform conversation with CMAP and others has some legs right now.
I would just add, Kate, that the series of hearings that the Senate Transportation Committee has scheduled, there's a topic that's assigned to each of the individual hearings, and the last hearing is as it sits today is supposed to be dedicated to revenue discussions. We continue to field requests from lawmakers and others on what could various changes produce, and we try and offer an analysis on those. But we've been we want to be deferential to the folks that have to vote on these proposals, and while we have some opinions on things that might incentivize transit use, for example, to be honest, we've been sort of agnostic about what package is put together from the legislative perspective, but we certainly will weigh in with analysis when people put forth ideas. Some other states have done some interesting things that I think have captured the attention of lawmakers. Minnesota and Colorado have instituted delivery fees. Obviously, I think there was a lot of coverage on what happened in New York. So those are all, I think, in the mix. But primarily, as Malik noted, we presented our ideas in the Transit is the Answer strategic plan, and CMAP has done the same. There's a lot of overlap there, but again, I think the legislative process has to make some progress. Process needs to make some progress on that front.
Thanks, Rob. I have a request of RTA staff. If we could put a link to the schedule of Senate hearings in the chat, and a link to the Transportation Tuesday webinar we did on how other regions are addressing funding, that'd be great, because there's just some questions about that. The next person with the raised hands is David. If you can unmute and answer or ask your question.
Hi, thank you. I was curious, I know this was touched on in Transit is the Answer, but I was wondering if and what if the RTA is still exploring ways to coordinate issues of land use and ensuring that various municipalities across the region are creating conditions that are supportive to allowing transit to be successful.
That's a great question. I believe Heather is on the call. We have a community planning program that has been going on for years, and a lot of the studies we end up funding and partnering with suburban communities, but also sometimes with the city, are related to TOD and what can be done, and ETOD and what can be done with land use and housing and infrastructure that is supportive to transit, bikes, and pedestrians. So there are several projects that we have funded, are working on, that continue to make progress across communities. There is this open question of overall authority to potentially directly be a developer. That is something that other countries have done more successfully than the US. But there's a lot more sort of legal and legislative and research needed to see if the immediate parcels around our stations can help not just bring people, but also help generate revenue if mixed use developments could happen. So we'll keep working on that in terms of a long-term strategy, but in the short term, there's a lot of work that RT is supporting that we'd be happy to provide you more information on.
Thanks. Sherry, you had your hand raised in the chat. You can go ahead and unmute and make your comment.
Just two quick ideas. One of the things that I really enjoyed and people talked about so much were the New Year's Eve free rides. If they could extend that and do that occasionally during the summer, not often, just maybe 2 or 3 more, for not Jazz Fest or anything, but something, they can come up with something. I don't have all the answers. Anyway, and then funding drives. WTTW with gifts does very well with that for many years. So as they've been saying, to do some pushing for funding, you can get some notoriety that way, and the people with money will actually be perhaps appreciating if people get on the bus and off the road. That's it.
Thanks, Sherry. Anyone else who has a question? If you can't raise your hand and can't put anything in the chat, you can go ahead and unmute and ask your question. All right. We usually offer an opportunity for, if you're part of an organization that has any meetings or events coming up that are transit related, importantly, that you'd like to let other folks know, since we have a lot of transit lovers here, you can go ahead and unmute or put that information in the chat if you'd like. Awesome. We appreciate everyone sticking around. Staff, a couple staff at least, are going to stay here through the end at 11, because that's what we said we'd do. But if there's no other comments, folks are welcome to go on with their days. If you don't, please subscribe to the Regional Transit Update. You will be alerted to blogs that way. And if you want to follow us on social, if you don't already, you'll also be alerted to our blog post recapping this meeting that way. Anything I'm forgetting? All right. Sherry, if you had another comment, you can go ahead and make it. Okay. I saw that there is some folks who want to save the chat but are having problems. Let me see if I can. Don't think I can.
I just saved it.
Okay. Well, but I think people wanted to save it themselves. And I don't see anything that allows me to allow you to do that or not do that. So I think, how do you save it, Melissa? I don't have it
in the three dots for more. Participant can chat. Yeah, there's an option to save chat.
Okay.
There's a good conversation in the chat happening about suburban frequency and transit ridership. So thanks, Amanda, for pointing that out.
And Maggie, thank you so much for posting about Activate Joliet on August 3rd. Definitely check out Maggie's chat about that event.
On saving the chat, I don't see that under the three dots on my screen.
I think we'll be able to save it, and like I said, we'll do a recap of might just be an option for hosts to save it, but
and it's a set option when you set up the meeting to allow to allow persons to save the chat. Thank you.
We'll note that for next time. Thanks. Go ahead if you have another comment.
I just wanted to follow up with the service level stuff. If unless somebody else wants to chalk.
You have the floor.
So I'm very interested to know how the collaboration, the monthly meetings have worked out. Is the RTA getting full collaboration from the service boards? And what are you publishing on the service level standards?
I'm not sure who on RTA staff wants to take that. I don't see Malik here, so PK, do you want to take that one?
Did you take your pills?
Go ahead.
Can you, I'm sorry, can you repeat the question, Roger?
So I've been focused on these service levels and what's RTA doing now. And one of the staff mentioned that there's been a cooperative collaboration at the staff level, monthly meetings, but hasn't been public because it hasn't been presented to the board, is what I heard. And my question is, does the RTA staff feel that it's getting full cooperation from all three service boards on feedback and communication on these service standards? And what are you publishing so that the public can be aware of what's going on in this space?
Yeah, so I think what Malik was referencing was the being responsive to requirements that were in the transit omnibus legislation from last year, which has required a lot more transparency around not really how the service standards are set necessarily, like what levels we would be offering in different communities, but how successful each individual agency is on meeting what their public schedule. The RTA's role in that is to certify it to oversight, to say yes or no they are meeting the requirements that are in that legislation. I don't believe we're actually to the point yet. Someone from Government Affairs can chime in if I'm mistaken here, where everything is required. But we have been meeting with them, have made progress towards this. CTA, I would say, of the three, has probably the most robust reporting on this. You can see all sorts of service data that is timely, route level, includes things like their hiring rate for bus operators, which has been a really big component of the challenges in reliability. So all three have been a great partner in this. I think it's been, I think the information that is available is more transparent and accessible than it's ever been. But there's obviously work to do. And this is kind of just a first step of ensuring that we're being as transparent as possible with the public.
So what's being put in the RTA's data portal on this area, if anything?
The way that we are structuring it is that we point to where the other three post theirs publicly. RTA hosts a number of different data dashboards that go into all sorts of topics. A lot of them around finances and expenditures.
I'm trying to stay focused on the service level question. It's my understanding that the service boards are not really keen on MMA. Everything's fine, just give us more money. And what I'm zeroing in on is, well, if everything's fine, are they being cooperative? Is the RTA taking leadership and proposing regional stuff, and are they responding to it? Absent a change in the law, just because the law doesn't require something doesn't mean that you can't try something.
Yeah.
And report back on what's happening. And if RTA is trying to do some regional service level standards and to look at these cross service board connectivities, the transfers, the other things where things can really get messed up, and the agencies are cooperating, that's wonderful. If the agencies aren't cooperating, then that justifies the legislative solution. And if you want to really draw the advocates and the public involved in this, you got to publish what's going on.
Yeah, so there's a lot there. I will not comment on any other agency's perception of introduced legislation or what their thoughts are on it. You can hear them talk about it at these hearings that are open to the public and get their perspectives directly.
I'm trying to put the legislative thing aside.
Right.
But I'm also trying to say that you can't sit back and say we only do it if the legislature requires us to do it.
Yeah, and I mean, with everything that we showed here today, I think that we can point to evidence of ways that RTA is trying to move towards this role currently. Where you can see it best is in fares. We have launched the Access pilot. We've been in the room and pushing the service boards on integration topics, and there's been success there. On the capital side, there's been consolidated grant efforts. We're evaluating projects at regional scale in new and different ways. We think there's more work to be done on specific topics within capital, like BRT and transit-friendly streets, and we've taken a much more active role in some really big projects, trying to insert more transit priority. I mean, on the service stuff, the goal in transit is the answer was to adapt to changing needs of the region. And I think we're being honest in pointing to, Metro's pivot towards regional rail, as well as Pace's revision project on bus in the suburban setting. CTA has had real challenges with reliability that they are making a lot of progress towards. That's what I was highlighting in terms of the performance data. And as well, they have this bus vision plan out, and they're at kind of a pivot point where I think we are going to see additional innovation, additional work on service, again, reflecting this kind of need to adapt to what we're doing in the region. So, I mean, the proof's in what's on the street, and I think we can point to areas of success, and we can point to areas where we definitely need more work. But yeah, I don't know how to answer your question more so than kind of just pointing to what we've done so far.
Well, I mean, one thing I would add, and I think it's more of a baseline concept on accountability. One of the stated interests of the legislature is to boost accountability in the system and understand who has responsibility for certain deliverables. And when it comes to the law, and I don't mean, you're I think more in tune with that, but we have to, it's not just collaboration and sort of saying, okay, why haven't you done it? Because you've had opportunities to do that. When you have accountability, you have to have responsibility and the power to enact, right? So collaboration has produced significant results. There's a ton of performance-based measurements listed on, as Peter said, on our website and the service board's website on service. But if there are certain standards that need to be maintained, we do have to make that very clear in the legislation.
Okay, thank you for bearing with me and going into some more detail. Appreciate it.
So we're going to close this meeting in 1 minute. Any remaining questions or comments can always be sent to communications, exactly how you'd spell that normally, at rtachicago.org. And we look forward to seeing everyone hopefully at our next coalition meeting next quarter. Our board meetings are also open to the public. You just have to let us know that you'd like to attend and make a public comment through that same email I just gave. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and close this Zoom right now.